بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وبعد السلام عليكم. It is a great honor and a great privilege to be in such good company, to be a part of such a beautiful assembly. And we normally do this program virtually, where the name of the program is Frames. And each month we interview different scholars, intellectuals, activists, writers, artists, and the conversation is normally enriching and enlightening, but also very easy to follow. This evening, I have the pleasure of conversing with my teacher. In case you guys didn't know, I attended ALIM in 2005, which is like mind-altering to think that that was almost 20 years ago. That was almost 2 decades ago. I was a student, and Dr. Fareed was one of my favorite teachers at the program and has been an inspiration to me of what critical and analytical engagement of our tradition looks like. And so today, I have the great pleasure of conversing with him. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm very well. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, it's good to see
MashaAllah.
you back for
Congratulations, your eldest daughter just graduated high school.
She did. My eldest
MashaAllah.
daughter just graduated high school. Oh. The applause sign is lighting up for the studio audience. You see. And so I was telling someone that sitting in the audience at my daughter's graduation, it was just such a surreal moment. I was happy, obviously, because she had completed this task, but I was also like, man, I'm getting old. I felt this is my eldest daughter is a college-bound student. I don't think about too deeply, because this interview can go from a conversation about Gaza and its impact worldwide to some therapy that I probably need. But I recall us being together in the Haram. We made Umrah in late December, and we were riding a bus from Mecca to Medina, I think. And you commented, you said, of course, what's happening in Gaza is horrific, but I've never seen the Muslim Ummah more united around an issue of moral priority than they are now. Perhaps you can pick up there and just elaborate.
Yes, certainly. I'm, for me at least, this is I sometimes call it a cosmic moment, in that it alters history.
Mm-hmm.
It causes human beings to recalibrate their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It reprioritizes.
Mm-hmm.
So in the grand scheme of things, Gaza is very small.
Mm-hmm.
It is small in terms of land size. It is demographically small. It shouldn't really feature so prominently.
Mm-hmm.
But it does. So there's more to the abuse of human rights going on there. It's a moment where, from our perspective as Muslims, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seems to be directly involved in altering the arc of history.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that happening in the United States, where for the longest time we had a particular relationship with the Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
And that relationship has been turned inside out.
Yeah.
That relationship has been turned inside out. It had, I was at ISNA, and at that time we had spent at least a decade working on a relationship, building bridges with the Jewish community, because it's very hard. And all of that seems to have just kind of frazzled right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, our relationship with the Hispanic community, the African American community, seems to have gone from strength to strength.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in this moment of crisis, we hopefully understand who our friends are. Who are those who are willing to sacrifice, sometimes even their jobs and their futures, in the interest of humanitarian priorities? So I think that's because of Gaza. I mean, nobody asked the African American community or the Hispanic to come forward and lend a shoulder. They did it. And what heartens me is the fact that so many of them are not Muslim.
I mean, it's in fact, we were on Umrah when the South African jurist, I forget his name, but he spoke about Israel perpetrating a genocide against the Palestinian people in front of the World Court. And I remember thinking, this is interesting. Maybe, why South Africa? Why would, of all of the nations of the world, because we know you reside in South Africa, why do you think that connection was there? I mean, just I guess for me, thinking about the clarity that we're gaining in this moment in terms of our allies, our enemies, people that are willing to put it on the line to advocate for Muslims. You had Ireland and South Africa, unique in that regard.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain some of the South
Well,
African
I think
connection.
part of it is kind of investments that Muslims have made to human rights in South Africa that are paying dividends. Muslims are very small in terms of number, less than 1 million people in South Africa, and not very affluent. There's certainly a segment that is very well off, but for the most part, not very affluent. Secondly, Muslims are part of the struggle. Those who have contributed to the emancipation of South Africa from apartheid, but also those who are struggling on a daily basis with matters that are basic, food, water, and so on. So this was something that allowed them to think about the Palestinian struggle as something that is close to them. In addition to that, the South African government, which is the ANC government, and now it's obviously not it has lost its majority, but the South African government at the time had a history of contributing, of aligning with Palestine. And during apartheid, the Palestinians played a significant role in challenging the status quo. So, those sacrifices that people had made in the past were not ignored. So it was symbiotic in that South Africans had benefited from Palestine, and the Palestinians were now benefiting from the South Africans. And like you rightly said, South Africa then took Israel in a very nuanced, very carefully worked out way to the World Court. And Muslims themselves played a prominent role in actually presenting the case there, which was something that we appreciated.
How can American Muslims? Because I mean, it sounds like what you're talking about is like, okay, we see the advocacy of South Africa on behalf of the Palestinian people in the World Court, but we don't see all of the investment, all of the work, all of the relationships, all of the alliances, all of the collaboration that went into producing that sentiment, producing that allyship, if you will. You also served as an imam in an American Muslim community for how many years?
10 years.
For 10 years. Is that same spirit of collaboration present within American Muslim communities? And I'm particularly thinking about immigrant Muslim communities. Or is it less of a priority here?
No, I think the circumstances are quite different. We've been in South Africa for as long as Europeans have been in America. Muslims, that is. We go back to the 1680s or something like that.
Okay.
So we're very much part of the South African fabric of the lower class. the first slaves brought into South Africa were Muslim slaves. So we too have a history of slavery, not as dramatic and certainly not in the same numbers, but our ancestry goes back to the slaves who were brought in from places like Malaysia and the east coast of India, which is now Bangladesh and that part of the world. So it helped us acculturate and become part of that South African fabric.
Right.
In America, the struggle is quite different. The other advantage we have is that the Jewish community in South Africa is no more than about 50,000. Not very active. Well, certainly active, but not very prominent in South African politics. And Muslims are very active and involved in South African politics. So this gave us a huge advantage over the Jewish community. We don't enjoy that advantage in this country. Nobody does. Not even the American majority. The Jewish community in this country, God bless their souls, they have a lock on American politics.
So there's always some very interesting back and forth, interesting dialogue about the nature of that lock on American politics. Many people say it's related to media, it's related to information, it's controlling images, controlling ideas, controlling the narrative. Some people say, no, that's a part of it, but that's secondary. It's primarily about money. It's about supporting candidates. It's about, making one's agenda a priority in, Washington through very concerted lobby efforts, very concerted spending. Some people say, no, it isn't that. It's something more diabolical, something more conspiratorial, something more sinister than any of those. And the reason I bring this up, because when Muslims discuss how we can counteract some of this undue influence of the Jewish community, we start positing these different strategies. Should it be this, or should it be this, or should it be something more sinister? In your observation,
I think it's all of the above. But ultimately, there is in the Jewish community a spirit that we ought to seriously consider and hopefully embody, which is the quest for excellence. So nothing is done in the Jewish community, from my perspective, is done in half measures. Everything is done properly, including control of the American public space. If you're the best, then society will be, especially a society that is as open and egalitarian as this one, will allow you to come to the fore, to get to the top. And so they excel, and the American public appreciates that. So there are no shortcuts to this. I mean, if you're saying that, was this system in some way rigged? No, it was not. The system was fully understood, and its levers were understood, where those levers are located and how they should be pulled. And so that pulling has taken place over the past several decades, and it has borne fruit. It's very successful. So, if you're looking for a playbook, it's open, it's right there.
But and when we talk about Muslims, one of the things that I struggle with is that kind of thinking, I think, comes very naturally to the Jewish community because of its history of being not only a minority community, but a marginalized, often scapegoated minority community. So it creates this heightened sense of al-Sabiyya. They've taken Dr. Jackson's seal, so I know they know al-Sabiyya. It creates this heightened sense of al-Sabiyya that they have, this self-identification, this usness. I think for Muslims, given our upward mobility, and quite frankly, barring these catastrophes like 9/11, like Daesh, like now Gaza, we're very comfortable. Many Muslims are very comfortable in their, affluent, kind of upper middle class enclaves. That makes it difficult to attain that same level of, asabiyya, kind of usness that would make us more effective as a cultural and political force.
You're right. You need a certain kind of homogeneity, demographic. People have to be part of the same ethnicity. We're part of the same religion, but it's a very broad kind of a cover or an umbrella, and so we get caught up, we get lost in it. But I think if we focus on a particular cause and pull in that direction, then that gives us a new sense of being and a new quest for an identity. The identity need not necessarily be one of a quest for excellence. You could also, and I would advocate that, you could also quest for human rights, for justice. It's certainly not as flowery. It doesn't have the glitter. It's not going to give you a very fancy home, but you're going to be fulfilling your religious mission, in that you would be with the downtrodden, regardless of their faith or their ethnicity, and that kind of that's a mental block on our part. As Muslims, we want to be a part of the successful community, but we lack that kind of that quest. We're not greedy enough to talk bluntly. But then we have a religious obligation. Kunu, be with those who are oppressed, be with those who need help, and you would find not just meaning in your life, but you'd also be making a meaningful contribution to society at large. The idea of going head to head with the Jewish community in trying to gain some advantage politically, economically, it might work temporarily, but I think it's a betrayal of our objectives and our mission as a Muslim community.
And that has always been the dilemma. So when we see something as catastrophic as what is taking place in Gaza, we tend to turn inward and say, how are we in such disarray that this could happen? Because normally we're a universalist, community. Our ethics are about human rights. We're about the neighbor. We're about honoring and celebrating the other. So we don't really have this kind of, self-serving, other obliterating kind of ideological cast to our religious beliefs. But when something like Gaza happens, you think, do we need more of that, that heightened, usness
I think there's several Gazas taking place all over the Muslim world. And tragically, some of them are self-inflicted wounds. So right now there is a far bigger catastrophe unfurling in the Sudan. And Gaza has kind of blotted that out. And our own governments are instrumental in pushing that agenda forward of creating more chaos in a place like Sudan. And then, of course, you have India, where there's a massive challenge to Muslim identity at a much lower level. It's pernicious, it's pervasive, but it's not something that is as obvious and is not as dramatic as is happening in Gaza. So we are focusing on that, but if we want to focus just on Islam in America, then I think we should look at how the recalibration has taken place, where our relationship with the Jewish community and perhaps even with the white American community is frayed to some extent right now. So this is a moment for pause. Are we going to continue with that, try to repair that and move on? Or are we going to do something that's radical from our perspective, which is to kind of get involved with the poor communities, with the African American community, with the Hispanic community, and work with that particular community. And that would obviously require of us that we change priorities and change perspectives.
No, entirely. You know, I'm always reminded of the story in which I was dropping someone at O'Hare Airport. It was a Friday, and it was just a little bit before Jummah. And so we dropped this person at the airport, and then my eldest daughter and I, we went to the masjid. I won't name the masjid, but a masjid not too far from O'Hare for Jummah. And the prayer was good. You know, I believe the khutbah, I mean the sermon was
to the
good.
extent that Jummah prayers can be good.
Right, to the extent that they can be good, right? It was good. I mean, it's a good sermon, something prosaic, salah or something. It was good. But after that, an older member of the community came to the front of the masjid to read some announcements, and you could tell it wasn't like he rehearsed this or, they just passed him the paper and he went to read the announcements. And so he said something about a person that passed and requested, dua for them. Then he said something about a bake sale to raise money for the Sunday school program. And then there was this strange look of like incredulity, of disbelief that covered his face, like, huh? And then he said, we're organizing buses from this masjid to go to the Daily Plaza, which is in downtown Chicago, for a Black Lives Matter rally.
Oh.
Then I wish I was exaggerating. He looked up and said, why would this be important to us? We're white. He said that.
Seriously?
He said, we're white. My daughter looked at me and said, Dad, he's not white. He said, Dad, he's not white. And for me, it wasn't, how he identifies racially or how he sees himself phenotypically. It was the fact that he was using that to demarcate a set of priorities that the community, in his view, should not identify with. And I thought, much more significant than like whether he sees himself as Caucasian, he was saying like aggressive police, and I have my own issues with Black Lives Matter as a movement, but he was saying this as a priority has nothing to do with us.
Absolutely.
How do we begin shifting that kind of thinking? Maybe
using
this moment.
Very hard, and yet the world is an open theater. If you look at, again, just make Gaza the focus of your attention, and look at the countries that are aligned to support Gaza unequivocally, and you'd find they're all brown and black,
except for Ireland,
and Ireland, of course. and where you do find this kind of equivocation and saying he and her, Europe and America, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, what does that tell you about where your priorities should lie? And how we can actually build a better future. There's much that is wrong with the rest of the world, but a Muslim is always one. In my understanding of Islam, my limited understanding of Islam, a Muslim is always one who's with the downtrodden, with the second class, with the Mazlum. That's the spirit that should ignite the mind and the soul of a Muslim. Many of our countries don't see it that way. The brother is not alone.
No.
The man who made the announcement, he's not. The entire country is out there who feel the same way. And that, globally speaking, that Gaza gives us an opportunity. We might choose to ignore that to our detriment. But this is that watershed moment where you have to ask yourself, well, what should we as a Muslim collective do, given the nature of the world? Because the world speaks in that language. When Europe talks, it talks in one voice. It makes very clear what its priorities are. Should we not be doing that same talking? And for American Muslims, you have a double responsibility. In no part of the world are people as educated and as affluent as you are. In the brown-black part of the world, that is. In no part of the third world, as the term is used.
Developing world.
The developing world, that's right. Al-Bilad al-Namiya.
Yeah.
Are people as...
No.
That's right. Naima. Are people as you're right at the front, at the cutting edge of knowledge, affluence. They want to know how the world operates. You can show that to them. You have the skills. You know how the system operates. You go to the best colleges. You go to the best universities. You should be giving back. Not you, perhaps, but your parents, and if not, you're too young, maybe your grandparents are indebted to Egypt and Pakistan and Nigeria and all of these places, and they need help. So that's a massive contribution we can make. On the other hand, you can just be self-centered, and you can pursue your own dream, and end up in a very leafy suburb of Chicago, and live the rest of your life that way. And the masjids are equally leafy, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think it's for me, it's trying to precipitate that shift toward a desire for more in terms of civil participation, civic mindedness, and some of those intentional relationships with the downtrodden, with the oppressed. And I think it's happening. You
think so?
I think it's beginning to happen. Early on, I think the focus was careerism, upward mobility. But I think now people see that alone cannot save us. In fact, with that alone, when something like this happens, you might find that your employers are shocked to learn that your priorities are not with them. Wait, you identify with this? And people were getting doxxed and losing their jobs. And I found it, I know a few people that have lost their jobs because of their advocacy for Palestine. And they have court cases that are pending right now. But what I find shocking was that this came as a surprise to your employer. Right? They actually thought that, no, of course.
You're one of us.
Of course you are, right?
That's
right?
a given, absolutely.
That's a given, right? A given, all that you've gained,
absolutely,
all that you've attained. Having a community that can model success, because I don't want to give short shrift to success. Success creates possibility. You have influence. You have money, but where can we derive inspiration? Either the prophetic model or other historical models. You were talking earlier about the South African model. That there's more than just a leafy suburb and matriculating into a prestigious college and taking a vacation every year. As a community, our aims, our goals, our objectives should be more substantive than that.
Yeah, and again, to go back to the Jewish community, the building blocks, the foundation for this particular success, and I call this a success even in the face of the adversities they're facing, were laid decades ago,
Mm-hmm.
and with great sacrifice. That's my point that I want to make, as well as a wish that you should not underestimate the sacrifices they have made in order to create this admirable edifice out here. It didn't come easy. If you look at when the seeds for the establishment of modern day Israel were laid, it go back at least 250 years, when people had, when the Ottoman Empire was still pretty strong, relatively speaking. And at that time already, the Rothschilds and everyone else was working towards establishing a state for Jews in Palestine. So this is forward thinking. This is deep introspection. This is planning ahead, and for all of that, like you pointed out, you need a lot of money. And every class I teach at here or anywhere else, I make it very clear to Muslims: your primary job is to just accumulate loads of cash.
You know what? I'm in the wrong profession. So I'm at
Because ultimately, without that, and without the right heart, you have to have the right heart to go with that. Nothing works. You need the Uthman radiallahu anhu for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make any headway. It was a double effort. And we because we focus so much on poverty and faqr and tazkiyah and zuhud and these things, we forget that ultimately this machine needs fuel. It has to be lubricated, and that lubrication is going to depend on you, because you're living in the most powerful, most affluent country in the world, and the opportunities are far and wide. They're out there. You have to make full use of that with the right mindset, that ultimately it's all about giving back. So you live a good life, and you enjoy life, you get the best education available out there, but ultimately it's all about giving back.
Globally, I mean, I think a lot of us are aware of all of the protests that we've seen, all of the encampments that we've seen. I mean, students really put it on the line, on a lot of these university campuses. If there is this momentum, this surge that we've seen in awareness of the plight of the Palestinian people, why don't you think, because I mean, I've seen pictures of rallies that people are there showing their support, demonstrating their allegiance to Palestine and the Palestinian people, as far as the eye can see. But it hasn't resulted. I thought this would put pressure on some of the governments of the majority Muslim world to take stronger stances, and it just isn't doing that.
Well, this brings me to the next part of why this is such a global event. It also lays bare the frailty and the limitations of these governments. One of the problems with the modern state is that its independence gives us a certain halo, a certain aura that is entirely false. It's all. If you take a country like Qatar, certainly has a huge GNP, massive. But in terms of actual size, it's like half the size of Chicago. Yeah, and the same applies to the UAE. All of these little city states are really inconsequential, globally speaking, at least in terms of military power. They're required by the United States in order to maintain its global power. But in terms of the power they wield themselves, it's almost zero. They're utterly dependent on some super state. So you get the impression that, well, Qatar is such a powerful state. It is powerful in only one regard, and that is financially powerful. And unfortunately for Qatar, most of that finance has to be secured by the United States. And so it's all invested in the United States. So the first thing we have to do is rid ourselves of this notion that these independent, powerful Muslim states are in any position to help the Palestinians. They're not. They lack the capacity to do so. Saudi Arabia is slightly different, but the rest of the Muslim world doesn't have that capacity. So we're looking at the wrong place.
Mm.
We're also looking towards the United States doing something for the Palestinians. That whole situation, that Palestinian Jewish situation, is such a tangled web that some of the best minds that I've looked at have yet to provide a meaningful solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary.
Mm-hmm.
There is no simple, straightforward solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The only thing that we can hope for is a lessening of the pain and the oppression. But the establishment of an independent Palestinian state just seems so far away, with all of these mustawtanat and that are out there within the land that should have been secured for Palestinian independence that no longer exists now.
Mm-hmm.
The Jews all over Palestine, but the Palestinians all over Israel as well. So the situation is extremely complicated. The best I can hope for in the near future is a lessening of the destruction of Palestinian homes and lives. I think when I look at Palestinians, experts talk about, they don't talk clearly about a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm.
Different people have different
or even a one-state solution.
Or a one-state solution. That's right.
One man,
so,
one vote.
and that's certainly not something that we can speak to about with any kind of expertise. We can hope for the best. We can hope that the elections in the United States will play a pivotal role.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if that will be the case, but I think factors outside Palestine and Israel will ultimately determine the fate of the Palestinians.
You know, one thing that I just haven't been able to get past is I don't believe that there is really indigenous support for the state of Israel in the United States of America. I don't, I know enough about the history of this country to know that for the longest time, many of the culturally significant institutions and individuals of this nation were deeply suspicious of Jewish people.
Yeah.
Sometimes downright anti-Semitic, downright racist, downright prejudiced.
Absolutely.
Against Jews. The idea that in a single generation, these attitudes are so different, I'm not sure I'm convinced of that. What I do think is at play here, and it's hard to conceptualize it, but I think there's just a deeply anti-Islamic bias to much of this. I don't think
too much of what?
To much of the support for the state of Israel among America's older guard. The young people are I think we've seen, as you mentioned, a sea change in attitudes toward the state of Israel among the youth of this nation. But even like this kind of apparent or purported indigenous support for Israel among America's older guard, it just seems it's unbelievable.
So it's more a dislike for Islam than it is for a soft heart for.
And I try not to say things that are incendiary. I try not to say things. I try to be, when they give you these papers, it's never to say you're doing great. I try not to say things that are incendiary. I try not to, and I would like to think about these issues with some nuance and not, in the manner of a demagogue. But
the question of what's this Islamophobia and anti-Islamism, I think our take on that is misplaced. There's a book by Norman Daniels, I think. He writes about about how Islam was viewed throughout history, and I would advise you to read that. This kind of Islamophobia, as we understand it today, is old. It goes back to the first or second century of the
medieval
Hijra.
period.
Yeah, it goes back that way, and we should welcome it. It's part of our heritage. You know, people have had this attitude. You know, I was before I taught class today. I was listening to Sam Harris and what's the other guy's name?
Hitchens?
No, he's dead now. Anyway, Dawkins.
Oh.
You know, pick on their favorite soft punching bag, Muslims, and for me, I think it's important strategically to talk out against Islamophobia, but it shouldn't bother us. It should not bother you. We should weaponize it. You weaponize it to gain as much traction as possible in the public space. That's important. But in terms of how it should affect your psyche, it's who we are. We've lived with this. People have been saying nasty things about the Prophet ﷺ from the very beginnings of Islam. This is not new. They've been saying demonic things about Islam and its foundings from the very beginning. We have created our own response to that. Different generations did so at different times. We just have to do the same now. So this should be a double track approach. On the one hand, complain about it like hell. On the other hand, embrace it and says, well, this is who we are.
Yeah, don't be bothered by it.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Don't be bothered by it. Yeah, and I'm just
you know, the interesting thing is about the Quran actually reflects that on almost every second page. They say this about you and they say that about you. They malign you in so many different ways. That's been perpetuated and has been perpetuated throughout Muslim history. You have to live with it. Sometimes you ignore it. Sometimes you take up the cudgels. That's something you have to decide. Do we ignore this or do we accept it? You know, perhaps I have an advantage over some of you in that I've been teaching this for a while. So when people say nasty things about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I know what the answers to that are, and I just shrug it off. And perhaps it's difficult. I don't know. I should talk to you more deeply about this. You cannot shrug it off. I can. And colleagues who do what I do also perhaps echo my own sentiments that, you know, we can deal with this stuff. But at the end of the day, it doesn't, here's the point, it doesn't diminish me as a Muslim at all.
Allahu Akbar.
Not at all. Hopefully, you know, we are all at that point, but certainly it raises questions, you know, which is why I'm a big proponent of just laying bare what Islam is. So my kids and you can know that this is what Islam is, and this is how you respond to it. But if you closet Islam, if you kind of, you know, sanitize it, which is our tendency, that brings its own problems. And you know, you're sitting in class or you're watching TV, and you suddenly told that the Prophet ﷺ married Aisha radiallahu anha when she was very young, and therefore he fits the category of, you know what, comes as a shock to you. But that's because you've never been told that this is Muslim history. This is why a class like Sirah at ALIM in particular, which is not the normal Sirah, by the way. Let's be very clear about that. Sirah at ALIM is not Sirah at any other place. In this Sirah, you're being schooled in all of these issues that are pertinent to life in the modern world, and you should be exposed to that. And that would thicken your skin and give you an ability to respond. And I certainly hope that the class that you've taken over the past few days with Dr. Jackson will help you do that.
I think we're going to transition to Q&A, but I just want to comment. You know, the last point you made, I think, is very, very important, because it moves us away from this tendency toward a kind of respectability kind of politics, thinking that if we can just show the dominant culture, our humanity, if we can just show the people that are perpetuating the prevailing paradigm that we're decent people, and invite them into our homes to have tea, and they see that my wife is just like your wife, and I'm just like you, and we both watch the stock market, and I like the Bulls, and you like the Chicago, and maybe this will change their attitudes. No, that's not.
Absolutely not.
That's not it.
It's not going to change anything.
That's not it. No.
It's not. It's not it. It's not going to change anything. It's you have to understand that Islam comes with a certain baggage. All you have to do is know the baggage. You have to know what that baggage is, and you have to know how to respond to that baggage. You don't have you don't have to apologize for it or ignore. You can't ignore it because it's being thrown at you all the time. Just know what it is. And it's once you get to understand it, it takes a while, I guess, but once you get to understand it and talk about it and study it, it strengthens you. It does. It does, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. So we want to give you guys an opportunity at this point to ask any questions that you might have about anything that was shared during this conversation, or any questions that you might have otherwise. The floor is open. Oh, Bismillah. Yeah, we'll give priority to those that are present. I think that's fitting. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Within the
conversation that there's been the talk of strategies that mobilize capital and perhaps national identity in some way towards the aim of some sort of action. But I think the question that I have is that how should our mobilization as a Muslim Ummah, seeing atrocity and genocide in multiple places, including here at home, how should we be critical of capitalism and nationalism? Should we be critical? Should we be critical in a way that articulates alternative frameworks of society, for example? Because along with, I think, a receptiveness amongst younger generations for a critical thinking about the foundations of our identity as Americans, there's also a criticalness of designed anti-intellectualism.
Of what?
Designed anti-intellectualism that pervades our discourse. And so I'd like to hear some of your views and thoughts on
that. I want to restate the question for the viewers. So if I don't get the gist of the question correct, then correct me. Saying that, yes, you heard two nodes in the conversation, one of the mobilization of capital, another about kind of the consolidation of identity or national identity. And how do we, and it sounds like you somewhat identify with those as goals, but at the same time, how do we sustain a macro critique of nationalism and capitalism in the face of, kind of engaging those priorities, those communal priorities?
Is that fairly accurate? Okay. Well, I think you have to. It's all about time management. If you pay too much attention to A, you wouldn't have time for B, and so on. So what you have to do is, because there's an intellectual element to what you're seeking, and there's also a professional element to it. Becoming affluent, becoming financially successful, important in corporate America, for example, that requires a particular mindset. If that mindset is constantly in a kind of a debate with a broader discussion about the value system in which you're operating, because that's basically what you're asking, says, we have this value system. Should I be doing this in the first place? Then you're second guessing yourself. That's not a good idea. You try and keep these things separate and work on this, because this is a work in progress. determining what the acceptable elements of capitalism are, what are not, what is the difference between free enterprise and capitalism, what is the Islamic perspective if you want to bring that in within this particular, all of that requires a certain amount of think time, where, you know, intellectual introspection, you can do that separately. And as you consolidate yourself financially or in terms of your career, you can pay less attention to this and more attention to that. This is a once this requires a certain group participation. Here you'll have to find different people to work with you, because you're going to have to bounce ideas of each other. You're going to have to get involved in conversations like this one, where people would, you know, you're going to read a lot. It's a lifetime enterprise. It's not. There are no shortcut answers to this. People have been working on this, have been trying to dissect and amalgamate Islam with capitalism on the one hand, Islam and socialism on the other, or Islam and communism. They've been trying to do this ever since these modern Western ideas came to the fore, and we can certainly learn from that. But I'm concerned that we should, unless you want to be an academic and pursue that solely. But if you want a double track approach, then you should be prioritizing your time. And I'm looking at you specifically. You look somewhat younger, and so you can do that. All right.
Very important. I mean, one, I guess, Islamic critique of capitalism is that money shouldn't be a commodity.
Yes.
That's just, I don't know, just an idea.
Well, that's a key idea, the critique of modern finance.
Yeah.
So my question is something that's come up for me often, especially is like, has there been an example throughout Islamic history where Muslims communities had theological differences but united when there was a common threat? Particularly, I'm speaking in the like frame of Palestine. I've heard the argument, unfortunately, that we shouldn't support so and so these resistance movements because they have a Shia theology, so they're not really and there's kind of like this kind of snowball. And so with that, I think what I've learned from the program a lot is like Muslim, and it's like how do we move forward when
good.
And like, you know.
I think I got that. You're right that there are moments at which we converge, and we forget that we are of different sects and castes and so on. This is that moment, by the way. You know, we could have spoken about that as well. It also shows the complexities of our lives. Hezbollah is getting and Lebanon is getting pummeled by the Israelis, and of course, some of our brothers are more concerned about us having an alliance with the Shia. You know, as if the Shia have this hidden agenda to convert all the Sunnis to Shiism. That's a huge sacrifice they're making in the name to save Palestinian lives, to suffer as they wanted. They could have just stayed outside of this war. The fact that they didn't, the fact that they're making these sacrifices, and the fact that this war might just kind of explode in that part of the world and then move eastwards towards Iran, tells you that this is more than just a Shia-Sunni conflict, and that during moments that are historically critical, Muslims have a tendency to overlook their sectarian fault lines. They're doing that right now. They overlook their sectarian fault lines and says, no, there's a bigger battle to be fought. So this is why I thought Gaza is so important, because it allows us an opportunity to look at ourselves and says, well, we can actually overcome this thing. We can look past the fact that the guy across the road is a Shia, because we're both trying to douse the same fire. I think this is that moment. You have questions on the online?
Yeah. So I think people have like interesting reactions. I'll read the first one. So the first, it's a comment you can respond to. Like, someone said, as a Muslim, I view my primary mission is to worship God, not to accumulate wealth or power. I'm finding this challenging and very curious about what our role or
or contribution to society?
As a Muslim, my priority is to worship Allah.
Yes, not to accumulate with wealth or power.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Allah wants of us. وَبَتَغِي مَا أَتَاكَ اللَّهُ في الدار الآخرة ولا تنس نصيبك من الدنيا. It says, and work towards the afterlife, but during the process, do not forget your share in this world. Number one. Number two, when you look at the life of the companions, there was a great deal of sacrifice. But that sacrifice actually paid massive dividends. The companions didn't die poor. They died very rich. And then the third one is during the time of the Umayyads, during the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, there was so much wealth in the Muslim community that nobody was wanting to accept zakat. So, there's a mindset within the Muslim community that considers the accumulation of wealth as being anathema. In my humble opinion, that is not a healthy mindset. A healthy mindset is one that sees no wrong in the accumulation of wealth and then distributes that wealth accordingly so that humanity can benefit at large. Islam asks you to take on that challenge, not to isolate yourself from the daily struggles of life. And part of that struggle is to make the world richer, more affluent, to partake of that, and then to distribute of that. If that was the mindset, you wouldn't have Abu Hanifa, an extremely rich person, a trader. We don't benefit from his trade directly. He may have given a lot fi sabilillah. We benefit from his education, from his knowledge. But we can't forget that he was also very much involved in commerce. So it's very important for us to adopt this mindset.
And also too, I think just to maybe rephrase some of what Dr. Fareed said, we tend to think of wealth acquisition as self-aggrandizement, meaning the more money, the bigger, fancier ways that I'm able to celebrate myself, and not money as a tool to work for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make positive impacts in the society in which one lives. It also requires us to move beyond a commitment to mere personal piety. The Prophet ﷺ, if he only we took the trip to Umrah, to the Haram. And even though I had taught Seerah many years before, that was my first Umrah, by the way, this past December, mashallah. My first time, in the Haram, in the sanctuary. Even though I had taught Seerah many years and listened to the Seerah and read the Seerah, right, and studied the Seerah, the spatial distance between Mecca and Medina, especially because it's the desert, it's empty. Once I got to Medina, I realized the Prophet ﷺ was not just looking for an enclave in which he could do his thing. He wanted to transform his society. He wanted to engage the world around him. If he was content to say, look, I got my space, I can really just do my thing here, nobody's going to bother me, I'm in Medina, there would be no need to agitate intentionally the Meccans. But the fact that he did is an indication that no, Islam has a societal imperative. Part of that imperative is fulfilled through marshaling capital in wise ways.
Absolutely.
Right? And if a person takes an approach that, I just don't care about that, then there's certainly a place for people like that. But I don't think leadership is the place for people like that. Maybe just the masjid or
absolutely,
in some kind of worship.
Khalwa.
Khalwa, yeah, in seclusion, mashallah. Alhamdulillah.
So this one is a little long. I'll try to. Okay, so this person said our primary mission is to worship God, but worship in the form of resistance is also a form of worship. The genocide that is going on in other parts of the world are equally horrific, and we need to stand against that too. However, Palestine cannot be equated with these nations because of the spiritual/cosmic representation of Palestine in the latter days. Should not all of our efforts be focused on Gaza in our lectures, classes, events, instead of book festivals and tours, which focus on other aspects, as if Gaza is just a small of the many challenges Muslims face?
What do you think?
Well, I certainly we can do more for Gaza. There's no denying that. But I think it would be a travesty if we did not acknowledge the great contributions being made by Muslims. I spent quite a bit of time in India these days because we have projects that we are working on, and I can assure you, the poor in India are also contributing to Gaza. Right? That shows spirit. It shows a commitment to the sacred sanctuary there. It shows an understanding of how important Palestine is to the Muslim. And I see this in so many other parts of the world. South Africa is a great example. Comparatively speaking, it's a very poor country. But every masjid in South Africa is not just speaking about Gaza, but also asking for and sending out funds, sending out entire groups out to go there. South Africans have died in Gaza because of just as aid workers. So there's a global change of attitude, and that's what I meant. That Gaza is more than just normal. It is an extraordinary experience for us. And whoever wrote that, they're right that we are suffering in many other parts of the world. But Allah has chosen this moment to force us to focus on this small piece of land on the Mediterranean coast. I think she had a question. Do you have one? Yeah.
So I work in the advocacy space in the context of politics and voter engagement, with the Muslim community specifically. And while I see a lot of other youth on the front lines of encampments and they're making a lot of sacrifices, I also do see a lot of apathy from the Muslim community, especially in in terms of continuing to mobilize in more tangible ways, like voting or supporting elected officials who share our values and interests. And those things directly impact our foreign policy. So, and I especially see this a lot in my home state, Kentucky. I think it's because it's a smaller community there too. So I feel like just all of this is in a way just normalizing what's happening in America and all the other atrocities we see around the world. Yet we see religious communities like the Jewish community mobilizing and becoming stronger with impact. And I just wanted to hear your comment on this because it feels like I talk to so many people every day. Sometimes it feels like I'm talking to a brick wall. And I'm even mentioning the prophetic example isn't
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And maybe we'll take this one and we'll wrap up for Maghrib, inshallah. But I can actually, I think, speak to this from something of a personal place. Apathy is a very it's an expedient way of protecting oneself from disappointment. As an African American, for a very long time, I was politically apathetic. Not because I wasn't politically astute. I would study politics. I would read about politics. I would discuss politics with people. But when it came to like voting, engaging my elected officials, and I just felt like all of that entailed an investment in the system that I knew would lead to disappointment. So to show up and to display my earnestness about a process that I didn't think was efficacious, that I didn't think would lead to anything, would almost seem like an embarrassment. Like I'm really coming here, like showing up as if I believe this is going to do something when I know it really isn't. But I am really concerned about this. And it was this really strange dilemma that I experienced for many years as a Muslim. And it wasn't until I was in Atlanta once with a friend of mine who owns an apartment complex there. And he was walking me around, showing me this very impressive development that they owned. And he said, just as a matter of fact, he said, we do voter registration drives here, and he just continued with the tour. And I said, voter registration drives? Voter registration drives? Habib, for what? Right, for what? And, he said, well, if you're apathetic about politics, you have people that have deep investments in the status quo. They appreciate your apathy. I want to thank you on their behalf. Because you don't care, because you're too pious, too whatever to care about voting, there are people who are invested in things never changing, things staying exactly the way that they are. They thank you for that, Ubay. Thank you, man. And maybe you even have a religious justification for it. And it just, I don't know, maybe it was just the way he phrased it. It just made me think differently. This posture is not revolutionary. This posture is a cop-out. And it belies belief in akhirah. Because everything I'm talking about, like, I don't believe it's going to be effective in the dunya. No, do it for Allah because you think it leads to something that's better than what we have, and Allah will give you a reward for it.
Inshallah.
Don't think about it as, well, what's this going to do? Maybe you do it. It's ajr. Adam Allahu ajrak.
I just want to pick up on something that she said, which is common amongst Muslims at a personal level, especially those who are active at the ground level. I can assure you that Muslims are not apathetic. They've never been as mobilized as they are now. This is why I was so impressed by what we have benefited from Gaza. And I'm not saying this, by the way. The Netanyahu government is saying this. Yeah, I'm not saying this. The Hindu community is saying this. As far as the Hindu community is concerned, there is no community as united as, listen to this, there is no community as united as the Muslim community. Should I repeat myself? Others see you as united. You don't see yourself as united. Netanyahu says the biggest problem with the Palestinians is their faith system. Go back and listen to him. Wow. The understanding of their faith must be modified. Subhanallah. Go back and listen to him. What you and I have is something we don't appreciate. It's invaluable. It poses a threat to the other side. So yeah, at some point, there certainly is this apathy. But overall, from New Zealand all the way to the United States, people are energized. People are energized. This whole experience is exhausting. It's been going on for how long now? I forgot I actually had this conversation with you in Makkah 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And this happened prior to that, right?
Yeah.
This is exhausting. You can't concentrate on this all the time. It's just, you can be fixated, but we don't have a choice. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this easy for us. Make it easy for the people of Gaza. Make it easy for the people of Palestine. Make it easy for the people all over the Muslim world. Make it easy for people who are suffering all over the world. Dua.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
ما شاء Allah, that was good. Thank you.
Always good to be in conversation with you.